Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, September 10th, 2024. I'd like to open the meeting at 7:30. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have roll call, please.
Mr. Carpenter, Mr. Fitzer, Mr. Colber, Mr. Kucera,
Here.
Mr. Nushai,
Here.
Ms. Redmond,
Here.
Mr. Scott,
Here.
Mr. Solomon, Mr. Tinlin.
Here.
Thank you.
So we have 5. We do have a quorum. Agenda item number 4 is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to change in tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chair, should we swap number 7 and number 8, just in case?
I thought about that myself.
Yeah.
Yep.
It wouldn't hurt, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead and make a motion, right? So we can,
I move that we swap number 7, agenda item number 7 and number 8.
support.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Mr. Kucera.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then aside from that change, I will approve the agenda as it stands. And we'll move on to the approval of the regular meeting minutes from August 27th, 2024, our last meeting.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes from August 27th, 2024.
Support.
Anybody have any changes or corrections? Seeing none, I'll take a roll call on that also.
Mr. Kucera,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond,
Yes.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion. If you've noticed, we've dropped the, for items on the agenda or not on the agenda, we just kind of streamline it there. So I will open it for public now. If anyone in the public wishes to opine on something, we'll give you a little time to do it.
Hello.
Hello.
Stephanie Colville, 38 West Tacoma Street. It was suggested that I come if I had any suggestions or solutions to the issue with 220 South Main House of Barbecue and the smoking with the residents. I don't have any concrete solutions. I wish I did. It would make this much easier. I know that as residents, we're going to need to compromise. And I'm willing to be fair and compromise. I don't want to push a business out of the city. But I do want to reiterate that unlimited use is not fair to those of us that live there, that are trying to protect our investments and our property values as well. You know, I know that it had been mentioned that he needs long time for some of the meats that he smokes, so maybe a possible trial run of maybe allowing a 24-hour usage as one of the options, and then a nighttime smoking as another option. And, you know, I think we're here because it started to become intrusive to the residents, and had it followed the original site plan that was approved, I wonder if we would have even noticed. And that is another concern that I have, is that the city needs to be held accountable to enforce these site plans when they're approved, and I feel like there was a big drop of a ball here. I went back and watched the April 12th, 2022 meeting where the original site plan was approved. If you haven't watched it, I suggest going back and watching that portion, because there were some little nuggets of information I walked away with that have me questioning the enforcement, you know, that the city, what the city is enforcing. A couple of things was, you know, it was talked about and it was voted on to have it removed when it was not in use. And another thing is that it was one smoker. There's currently 2 on the property that are there when not in use. They're not moved. I don't recall if they were moved early on, but I can tell you that over the past year, they remain there unless they're being taken to a Arts, Beats, and Eats type festival, or, you know, if they're catering, but they stay on site. at all times. You know, I know that they're asking for the continued use to sustain their business. But I also know that it sounds like they opened up the business without having approval to use the smoker initially. So, you know, I question if it was just something that they didn't know needed to be done, and they're not here, you know, to speak on that. So I don't know, but it's a question I had, because, you know, they want to be able to keep their business up and running. But again, like I said, I need to protect my property value. And I feel that if they are allowed to have unlimited use, that my property value could be affected. And I'm kind of in a position now where I don't have an option. You know, I'm at the mercy of the planning commission. I'm not at the mercy of the city enforcing the site plan. I also know that I live in a spot where these are risks that I take. But again, you know, I'd like to finish this off with just the request that the city do better in enforcing what they approve and don't approve. So thank you for your time. I appreciate your attention to this matter and your continued discussions over it. Thank you.
Thank you. I would recommend you just keep a track of our agendas, and you'll see it. They will be coming back in front of us.
I plan to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a link on my phone and I check it regularly. So
Okay.
thank
And
you.
also, if
Thank
I
you.
can opine, if there is outside the, you know, hours that we agreed to initially, you know, he was asked to go back to the original site plan aside from the placement. The city, and I'm not saying you haven't done your job at calling the city and letting them know, but continue to do that, I guess, as well.
That's one question I have is, because I know sometimes when it's outside of the agreed upon times, it's outside of maybe the city being open or enforcement, you know, code, whatever. What type of record, I guess, would be necessary to prove that it was being done outside of a certain time? Are we looking for like video or pictures or both? Or?
I'll chime in a little bit. There is actually, if you go to the city website, there's a service ticket portal that you can click. And if you click down, there's a drop-down menu of the different departments, and there's code enforcement. And then you could document that right there. I've received a few emails from the citizens around Tacoma. So besides calling the non-emergency city line for the police, you can also document it there.
Okay, but is it like, are we looking for like pictures to say that it's being used? I mean, because at some point it could be my word against
Yep.
theirs, right?
I don't think that service portal allows you to have pictures installed. It normally just goes to code enforcement officer, so
Okay.
they'll contact you by phone.
Okay,
I would
if you
say
had
that
pictures to
pictures
back-
are
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
good.
okay, all
Yeah.
right, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wishing to comment on anything? Seeing none, I will then close public discussion, and we've transposed 7 and 8, so we'll move on to 8, which is the continued discussion on short-term rentals. Mr. Tangieri, you want to start us out with this?
Sure. So last time we did decide on districts for these. There's BRD 2 and B3. So the updated version of the memo reflects that. I grayed out a paragraph and put a little comment in there. I'm not necessarily recommending taking this out. I'm just noting that if this is actually where they wind up going, that number 4, it might not necessarily be needed, but we don't necessarily know where council's going to come down when this gets to them, whether or not they're going to be agreeable to the districts that the planning commission has put in place here. So I think leaving it in there makes a certain amount of sense, because that keeps it around for future discussion if council has a difference of opinion with the planning commission on where these can go.
But Joe, that wasn't something that the planning commission thoroughly discussed and decided that 5% was any type. So I hesitate to put it forth as though it's something that we recommend, even though it's not.
Well, it's been in there for about 2 years now, so if there's
Well,
a chance.
make a motion last week and it was supported and followed to not have it in residential.
Right, yeah, I'm just thinking that
So Joe,
Like I
you're saying
said, I
that's in the
wanna-
actual ordinance right now, the density requirement?
No, it's,
No, it's not.
it's been in the draft for a
Draft form,
while.
But
and-
the actual ordinance, there's no density requirement currently.
Right, exactly,
Okay.
and that's why we had it in here. It's just that I think that this language needs to be kept around because we're going to send a recommendation to council and we don't know what council's response to it
Well,
is.
but I
so-
don't want this as part of our recommendation.
Oh, sure, in terms of whether it's in there when it goes to council.
Right,
Okay,
right.
sure.
Because that seems like it'd be confusing to council. If this is in here, maybe in a different portion of it, if we were to say, if they don't follow our recommendation, they can suggest that we impose a percentage that's
Sure.
discussed and, debated and open to discussion. I think that would be more reasonable. But I don't necessarily think that this is in line with our, recommendation that was brought forth last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry.
Okay, sure. As far as the standard itself, if for some reason this did wind up in residential districts, are there any objections to the standard as it's written? If that's
Yeah.
what wound up happening, or?
Yeah, 5%'s a lot.
Well, it's designed so that most blocks wouldn't be able to have more than one house. If you say 1%, then it's kind of like, how do you interpret 1%? Because most blocks don't have anywhere near 100 houses on them.
I just
So-
don't feel comfortable putting this forth as a recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
It was not voted on in that way.
Well, that's the purpose of a public hearing, I guess, but,
The public hearing for city council or for planning commission?
For planning commission.
Yeah, we're still just trying to tweak it. And once we
Tweak it,
get
then
tweaked,
it's come
then
back
we'll
again.
Yeah, so if you
public
don't want it in there, then we take it out, but
Oh,
it's,
okay.
I mean,
And Joe, one question I did have from the community, and I think they were some of the owners actually, if we change the ordinance for no Airbnbs in R1 and R2, is there a grandfather in the laws, or is that
well,
handled
I
by our
mean,
city attorney?
zoning is not retroactively
Yeah.
applicable.
Okay.
So it would become a non-conforming use in that
Yep.
district until it ceases, in which case it cannot be revived.
Okay.
So would that be at the time of the license renewal, or would that be at the time that they stop operations?
I would have to confirm with the city attorney, but I believe it would be cessation of the use. So they would probably be able to continue up.
So the current owners
getting
that
their license.
stay within the guidelines and don't get
Right.
complaints are fine to continue
They
operating?
should be, yes, as
Yeah.
long as they're consistently renewing their licenses and they remain a non-conforming use.
Okay.
If they were to end the use at any time for 6 months or greater, then they would not be able to continue.
And by end the use, you mean like not continue to apply for that license and
If they
be
don't get
reinstated?
if they don't renew their license, that would be one way.
Mm-hmm.
If they cease to advertise the property for
Oh, okay.
rent, would also be another way.
Okay. And is there, I thought we might have the city attorney here for this discussion since it's a lot of legalness. But like, if there was the ability to allow someone that was within a certain amount of miles that operates it or within a proximity to it, is that something that you've found in any ordinance?
You mean proximity between the two?
Between the primary residence and the actual Airbnb. Like the gentleman that wrote us lives next door. I mean, he's kind of like the exception.
Sure.
Right? I visited his page and, I'm just wondering, because he's next door, he's able to be responsive, he's able to maintain it in a different way than someone who's out of state, out of county, out of, country. Is there any ordinances that we can look to that might help?
I would think we'd be able to put a limitation that the owner must live either in the city of Clawson or a city that's adjoining the city of Clawson. So they're not living up in North Country or something. I would think we'd be able to control that. without legal opinion, I'm not positive of
I
that.
believe I read, I went through a whole bunch of different
I think other cities are
ordinances
doing
from
it.
other cities. I believe I saw that somewhere,
Yeah, I think other cities are attempting it that way. Either you live in
Right.
the city or a city that adjoins.
or an adjoining city. right?
The only thing I have with that is like the enforcement, right? So sometimes that gentleman that wrote us, he's actually the host, but sometimes you don't have the host that's also.
No, the manager would have to be in the city or. an
Well,
adjoining
see,
city.
that gets a little hairy then, so there's no black and white, because maybe the host, then they'll just hire a host in Clausen, and that'll be that, and we can still have an infiltration of Airbnb.
No, I hear you.
Yeah,
And I think the concept with the adjoining cities, I think something better use would be like a radius from the city, so within 10 or 15 miles, or a number that's determined instead of adjoining cities, because that could vary differently where our borders line up. So if a radius,
That works with a 15-mile radius of.
yeah,
of the
and I
house.
just was throwing a number out there.
They are required to have a local agent already by the general ordinance.
What does local mean, Joe?
It's defined in the general ordinance. I can look it up.
And then I also just want to provide some more information on those two zoning districts that the commission voted on last meeting. So I looked at both of those, and I believe that there are 3 which would be considered single-family homes within those 2 districts that would host it. I mean, you're not going to have a short-term rental operating in the BRD2 district at a large commercial space. So I believe the number is 3 that I was able to identify. That would be-
3 homes, you said?
Yes.
Are they operating as single-family homes, or are they operating as like?
Yeah, they're
the-
single-family homes.
Okay.
Yes.
So those are grandfathered in.
Well, they're owner-occupied homes. I'm just saying that there's 3 parcels zoned in total out of BRD2 and B3 that are homes that, by the way your motion stated, short-term rentals could be operated in those zoning districts, and that those 3 properties are the only ones that'd be able to operate as a short-term rental.
And they're not now, they just would have the
Right.
ability to.
Correct.
Well, they're not the only ones that would be able to operate. It doesn't say that you have, I mean, no, because we're not saying that you have to have a single-family home in B1 or B3. We're saying, and I was gonna add clarity to this, that those they should conform with the uses of a hotel, motel, or, let's see, we've got boarding house, hotel, motel, and I think rooming house, I don't think rooming houses are allowed in Clausen, from what I could read from the ordinance. But, I mean, if they should operate within the constraints and what we have defined in our, use standards for those zones. So I don't see how we would have to confine it to a single-family home.
I don't think you can operate a short-term rental out of a commercial building, is the point I'm trying to make.
Or a multifamily.
Right. Which I don't think there's any multifamilies in either of those districts regardless.
Well, we're discussing mixed uses, and we have the ability to have a work-live in our ordinance already. So I'm not sure how, and I didn't check the ordinance to see what zones those live-work spaces were allowed in, but I believe they're allowed in at least 1 or 2 of the B zones. So I don't see why short-term rentals wouldn't be allowed there.
Short-term rental is defined as a dwelling or condominium or portions thereof in which the owner does not reside, available for use or used for accommodations of lodging or guests, paying a fee or other compensation for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. So it does have to be a dwelling, not necessarily a single-family home, but it does have to be a dwelling.
So there are other dwelling uses within those zones than a single-family home.
Well, there's, off the top of my head, there's the 3 homes that I've identified, and then there's the hotel on Maple.
But I'm talking about, okay, maybe not operating, but usage allowed in those zones. There's more than single-family homes allowed to be used as a dwelling in those zones.
I mean, technically, yes, but those buildings would have to be taken down and then rebuilt to be something else.
Yeah, B3 doesn't allow residential units at all.
Was
Actually, not
B3,
BRD2,
what zones was it that we?
BRD2 and B3.
BRD2 and okay, and then I actually found that I1 does allow it in special land use. They allow for hotels and motels to operate. So if all three of those zones allow hotels, motels to operate as a standard use, then it seems as though, especially with our move to mixed uses, they would be able to operate.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you might be adding uses to those districts. Some of the areas that currently have the B3 zoning might change to something else or get an overlay or something like that too, so.
But they're already allowed as a special land use permit, hotels and motels.
In B3?
In B3, B2, and I1.
Yeah. Sorry. Need to disable my messages there.
And there was nothing that I saw in a hotel motel that would stop someone from being able to turn a partial use in that for an Airbnb or a hotel motel use.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing.
Oh, okay, I didn't know if you were looking at something, okay. Joe, could we, well, I guess I'll let other people talk, because I would like to make a, I guess, maybe a motion or see where people are at in terms of adding some fact findings and terms to help city council see why we came to the conclusion we did. But if other people want to talk first, I'll.
What would you like to do again?
I would like to add into some, before we send it off to city council, some findings, fact findings, and some terms, refer them to some terms that our ordinance already defines in order to give them the knowledge of where we,
I'm confused.
I don't know.
What fact finding, what are we talking about? What
just the,
direction do they need?
well, you know law, right? So you find facts in order to put forth.
But we already made the motion, we approved it, so what facts are we talking about?
Well, I would like to, well, if you would like me to discuss them, I was letting other people talk first, but I can discuss them when the time.
But, yeah, so you're trying just to get a briefing to the council, because even though if we agree the language, it still has to come for a public hearing, correct?
Right.
Right, yeah, so I think what you're
And we
trying
have
to
a
do
fact-finding
is you're
type thing.
trying to lay out some facts in order to support the language that you've settled on prior to scheduling a public hearing. And then those facts would go with the
With the
language
ordinance essentially,
to-
which is what I've seen common in many other communities in
Sure.
order to give substance and support to their direction.
So there will be like a language of an ordinance and then a brief
Yep, a
along
briefing.
the side?
Or before it, that happens very often if you've,
So if you, as a council, or, sorry, as a planning commission, if you agree on your findings of fact by a motion, then you can incorporate your findings of fact into your motion to recommend adoption to the council, and then via your minutes, your findings of fact would be included with your transmission of the recommended ordinance.
It seems to me there's pretty much two issues that we're working on here. which is what should the overall cap on the units be, and where should the use be permitted? On the caps, I think we hit an agreement here. It says that the cap discussed previously by the PC was a 10-year, 10 per city, 10 per year citywide. That tells me we can only have 10 short-term rentals in the city, right?
Per year, it
Well,
says.
yeah.
Right, so
For
you'd
this
be
year.
able to issue 10 licenses per year, so.
Problem with that is we already have 8 that were provided to us by the city that are licensed. And I came up with 6 more that are operating that are not licensed. So we've already got over our quantity.
Well, and I don't think that I don't think we voted on the 10. I think that's something that Joe's brought
But
to
I
us.
think we have to get something like that on
Right, and
paper.
there's never been a solid, yes, we're gonna go with 10. So that's
Right.
why it's not in the language above. That's why it's its own discussion item.
I think that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to come up with, let's say
Yeah.
5 years, 10 years, put it on paper, agree
Right.
to it, send it on to mayor and council. That and the locations where they can and cannot go.
To your point, some of the units that are being advertised may be units that have a principal residence exemption and therefore aren't licensed, because that's what the general ordinance says, is if it's a principal residence, it's not required to get licensed. If it's not a principal residence, then it has to get the license. So basically, what the general ordinance is, and I know some planning commissioners have had issues with this, but the general ordinance is basically saying if you have a rental unit and the purpose of it is to be a rental unit, then you got to get the license. If you're primarily living in the home and you're renting it out a couple times a year while you're gone, then you're not getting a license. So
Well-
there's a possibility that some of the ones that you're seeing that aren't licensed may not need a license. Some of them might, and maybe there should be enforcement on those, but,
I found them just by going to Airbnb.com Clausen, and they're listed on the Airbnb site.
Sure.
So from my perspective, that means it's available. If I wanted to rent one tomorrow, I could.
yeah.
So Airbnb's aware of it. The city's not aware of it.
Yeah, so the general ordinance says all dwelling units except those which are duly registered as a principal residence exemption under the Act. I'm not going to read all that. Which are used for short-term rentals for more than 14 calendar days per year, shall be registered and licensed with the city as stipulated, et cetera. And then the license has to be renewed every year. So there is an exemption for properties that are registered as principal residences. That is just one possible reason, not necessarily the reason, but one possible reason that you might be seeing units that are not licensed advertised online. I cannot confirm on a per unit basis if that's the case, but there may be units that are operating without a license that should not be.
But that just gets back to the problem of enforcement of the entire ordinance,
right,
right?
exactly,
So,
right.
and our attack was just not allow them to be in residential areas in the first place, and you don't have the enforcement issues.
Right, then you're not scratching your head as to whether or not this one's permitted or that one isn't. It's just, well, it's there, so it shouldn't be.
It would be interesting to us if we were aware of any police reports being filed on any of these. I think that would, is that allowed? We don't have a lawyer here, so I'm kind of winging it, you know?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of answering this question, weighing in as well. I don't know if we could provide all those police reports to you. If anything, it'd have to be FOIA'd. I mean, I could see if we have anything for those addresses, but I can't confirm one way or another right now. But we have sent out code enforcement letters to some properties we've identified as potential short-term rentals. So, you know, if they don't get back with us, we'll send another one, and then we'll keep investigating from there.
Okay.
So how do you check those, Nick? You go to like Airbnb and then you,
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, so.
yeah, I'm sure, because they don't usually give the exact
Yeah,
address away, right?
And they don't even really give the exact street.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're hard to
It's
find.
very region-based, and so, if they have photos of the exterior of the site, kind of just take a stroll down Google Maps and see if one of the homes fits that classification. A couple of them are easy to identify, though, just knowing where the rough location is. It's not as easy as you would think. And I think
Yeah.
I made the joke last time is that as much as I love Clausen, I don't want to stay in all these short-term rentals to figure out their addresses. But the ones that we're aware of and can identify, we're working on getting them to be in compliant with the ordinance.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if we're all that anxious to have those that haven't been compliant in the past become compliant before we have this passed by the council, just saying. So we have a limit of 10 right now. If we got the additional 6 that Greg had found, or however many you've already sent notification out to, we would certainly be well over the 10.
Until the ordinance, until we write the ordinance, send it down and get approval from mayor and council, there is no control over that. It's the same problem we have with
No,
the,
I'm just saying, why are we sending out notifications to people at this point?
This point?
Just because we found them? Yeah, I'm just saying.
yeah, it's not going to make a drastic change in their life because the ordinance isn't in effect at this point. Same thing we did with the snub-nose houses. Remember, we don't like the garage out front? The contractor was smart enough, he went out and got the permits pulled on the houses before that was read into an
Yeah.
ordinance. So we have 2 more snub-nose houses that we didn't want, but he got around it. And that's what these people will do too. They can, open up these places until the ordinance is a law, they can get away with it. That's why I'd think maybe we should start pushing here and let's come up with an ordinance. Do you want to put a distance on it, and how many?
In all area, you're talking about in the B1 and B3 districts you're talking about? Or, sorry, B3 and B2?
If that's what you're happy with.
I mean, well, that's what
That's what we have right
we,
now.
that's what we
Yeah,
have.
BRD2
Yeah,
and
the two
B3 is
districts
what we
are
already have.
BRD2 and B3, which were approved last meeting.
I mean, I did find since that meeting that we do allow a special land use in I-1. So I feel like in order to stay consistent, it might be advantageous to include that. They allow hotel motel use.
Okay, that'd be part of it. What do you think about the cap? How many of them do we want to keep in Clausen? We mentioned 10 per year. Are we happy with 10?
Not per year, I would think. I think that's too much.
I think that's a
Well,
lot.
it's always going to be 10. It's just the cap on the number of licenses that can be issued.
Say that
Hold on,
again.
one more time.
It's always going to be 10. It's not like you add 10 more every year. You can
Oh.
issue 10
I
licenses
see.
every year. So if you're renewing a license,
Okay.
you're one of those 10.
Well, in my head, it was
It's kinda like a
in
liquor
10 years,
license.
100 of them. so-
Yeah, no, that would be concerning.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's
10
it's a
year- 10
cap
per
of
cap.
10
So
every
no
year.
more than 10.
There will never
Right.
be more than 10.
I see.
Exactly.
Right.
So I'm happy with that. I don't know if everybody else
Yeah.
is. Add that on. Next thing is the distance of the,
Excuse me, are we going by one, or should we make motions, or what are we doing?
I'm hoping she's writing down notes and we can get this all in one ordinance.
Oh. Okay.
Well, I'm writing down
She's
notes,
not
so-
around.
So somebody's writing notes. The other thing is, let's agree with the person that owns the property has to live within a radius of 15 miles of the.
I
The
don't
owner,
know.
or the manager, or both, or?
I don't know if I feel comfortable with that portion yet, to be
Okay.
fair. I mean, because there's,
I think we should invite the attorney and ask him about
Yeah,
this.
that'd be a good
because
idea to have him here.
The property rights might affect that. Okay, there's laws that go all the way to the Constitution about that, so.
I say we just throw it in the ordinance, so they have to be within 15 or 20 miles.
And maybe they'll strike it.
We vote on it, and if Rennes finds it a problem, I'm sure he'll bring it to our attention.
even in all, you're talking in B2, B3, and
Yeah.
I-1.
Wherever a license is allowed.
Yeah, whoever holds the license has to be within 15 or 20 mile radius.
Yeah, I think it's less consequential if they're not in the R1 and R2 districts. I mean, we don't require the owner of the Quality Inn to live,
Right.
within 15 miles.
With a commercial property, it
So-
almost seems, like you said, that it can be
Yeah.
a little bit of a,
Yeah.
because if it's a commercial use, that might be
I'm just
tiptoeing
feeling
in.
we could throw it in ordinance, and if Rennes tells them we can't do it, we'll take it out.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that if it winds up in the R1 and R2, then you'd want something like that. But yeah, if it's in BRD2 and B3, it's in a commercial district, and, I mean, we wouldn't require the owner of Osaka to live within 15
Right.
miles of town, so I don't know that it's necessary if you're keeping it in those districts. I think you might have a disparate treatment issue there.
Of what
My
issue?
what?
A disparate treatment issue where you're treating
Yeah.
different business
Yeah.
owners differently.
So then we
In my
just-
mind is if I can own property all over the world, why not in Clawson, right? If I live far from, but whatever.
I believe there were lawsuits about that
It's
with
gotta be.
marijuana and stuff in like
It's gotta
Detroit,
be.
right?
Right.
Where
Yeah,
they
there
were trying.
were, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So if we don't want to go with that, let's just go with an ordinance that's saying that we're already capped at 10, can't exceed that, and then we just need the zones that where they're allowed and they're not allowed.
Add the I-1? Is that the additional zone you wanted to consider?
If that is okay with the planning commission, that was one that I did,
Yeah.
when I did a search on our zoning ordinance of hotel motel, I-1 did come up as a special land use.
So it's consistent with our thinking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
Yeah, you're treating it the same way in all three districts that treat
Madam
what
President,
you're
you sound like you're about to
considering to
make a
be
motion.
equivalent uses.
Well, but do I need to include my findings and facts, and do you guys want to discuss those prior to?
We can do that later.
You can make a motion, we can keep discussing this before I pull roll on it.
All right, well, it's long, guys. All right. I will make a motion to amend our short-term rental ordinance. Wait, are we supposed to open up public comment
I was just
first?
asking the same thing.
I
Did
can-
you-
I can
You're
open
not
that.
required to, but at the call of the chair, if you
Yeah.
believe that they're interested
I
parties.
will before we call a vote on it.
So you want me to motion it first?
Make a
Okay.
motion, make a motion,
Okay.
see if we got support, let's have a discussion on it.
All right, I will make a motion to amend our short-term rental zoning ordinance to include I-1 and 10, cap it at 10 per year. And I would like the following findings of facts to be included. Let's see, I would like, hold on. I don't know if these are finding of facts, Joe, so let me know if they're supposed to be somewhere else. Definition of our Clawson ordinance definition of boarding house, hotel, motel, home business, dwelling as a single or one-family detached, the definition of family, definition of nuisance, as well as some court precedent, including Thiel v. Goings, let's see, Bloomfield Estates Improvement Association versus Birmingham, and Shadit versus Brill, that's SCHADT v. BRILL. Taryn 467, Mish at 72. I don't know. That'll take you there, though. Eager versus Peasley. Taryn versus Zwitt. Donald Eager versus Celia Trust. And these are additional findings. Planning Commission has determined that if current trends were allowed to continue, short-term rentals could undermine the character and stability of neighborhoods in certain districts by, among other things, decreasing the number of long-term residents, decreasing enrollment in local schools, decreasing the availability of long-term housing stock, thereby driving up prices and making long-term residency less affordable, an increase in safety and nuisance complaints from long-term residents for trash, parking, noise violation, among others, and a finding that hotels, motels, and STRs are commercial use. The activities related to and permitted in these uses, such as but not limited to operational hours, crowding, noise, traffic, are problematic. regulatory restrictions are, can become dangerous in residential zones. And that is my full motion.
Got that, Joe?
That's what
Could you read that
recordings are
back?
for.
Can you describe that back? It makes sense. I think it's two major points. You're just adding all of this as,
It's findings of facts
Findings
to
of facts.
potentially, and if you want me to opine on, well, I guess I need a second before I discuss.
Second.
okay, we have a motion, we have second. I'm not going to call the vote on it first. Do we have further discussion amongst ourselves?
If you want to know about, I have a little blurb about the court precedent on each one, if you want more information about like that, but,
The case citation should be plain.
I was
Yeah.
gonna
As
say,
far as
those cases, where did you come up with?
where'd I come up with them?
Or
Yeah.
maybe, how are they related to what we're doing today?
Right, so that's where I was saying I can give further detail on them. I mean, do you want me to go into case by case? I mean, I won't go
It's
and
not-
read the
it's-
case.
It's not about that. These cases are from your own research that you did?
Yep.
Okay, so how are they relevant to what we're doing today?
They're relevant in the way of deed restrictions and commercial uses and their Supreme Court precedent on
But they,
residential property uses and rights, as well as rights of shareholders in the community. So if you want specifics on them, I can give them to you, or you can look them up.
It's going to
thank
make
you.
the
I'm
motion.
capable of looking up and get them from you as well.
Quite long.
However, how are they relevant to what we're doing today? With
There,
this-
this is a fact finding that I would like
That's
to
not, but
be
how is
sent.
that a fact finding? You're citing a case.
That's to inform city council that there is a precedent for it.
Okay.
If I may, I believe you might have stated roughly 7 cases. I don't know that number exactly. But if the commission is going to be voting to include that in the fact-finding mission, I think it'd be appropriate to touch on what each one is about. That way, everyone's comfortable that you're not
Right.
throwing a random case in about something not relevant. Not that you would, but there's always that opportunity if you're citing a case that it might not be relevant to the conversation. So for the record, I think it'd be important to just touch on what
Okay.
each case is.
Yeah. So
Pardon me, if I may, are you still want to keep them all together? Because we can separate them, the fact finding and the motion about the zoning and the cap that we're doing as well.
I don't know what you mean.
We agreed on the cap, that we're going to talk about a cap, the I-1, right? And one more, I believe, okay, on your motion that was.
The cap, I won.
An additional zone. So what you're proposing is having a motion just for the ordinance, but then as a
Precisely.
body directing the administration to have a fact-finding
Sure, that will be separate.
separate,
Do it
right?
So another motion for a fact finding?
Yep.
To
Can we
it
do
now.
that so the
Correct,
body
that's what
can-
I'm asking.
Yeah, I would have 2 separate motions, one for the ordinance amendments, which is the zoning and the cap, and then a separate motion identifying the fact finding.
You could have told me that before I read for 5 minutes. That's
Well, I
fine.
think we can modify that motion, I believe, with, as long as the individual is.
First of the 2 motions should be finding of fact, so that you made the finding of fact motion,
Okay,
and now,
We'd have to vote on that fact-finding motion, and then you'd state the other motion again for the 2 ordinance-related items.
do you still support that, whoever supported me?
Yeah, but can we put also, because we're directing a fact-finding, essentially sheet to be put together, can we put a milestone date on that too, within next meeting? Because you're going to put it all together, right? And I'm
Yeah,
assuming is somebody going to validate the cases?
I believe what the next step would be is Joe will draft the ordinance, present it to the planning commission, ensure it's everything that the commission wanted, and at that point, a public hearing would be scheduled for the planning commission, and it would come back, have the public hearing, review the ordinance final time, then at that point, send it on to council.
So that would be scheduled at our next meeting.
Correct. So next meeting, we'd present the ordinance, have the fact-finding report
And a public
as
hearing.
approved, and then you'd approve the ordinance language, schedule a public hearing, and then at that public hearing, approve the ordinance, then it would go to council.
Can the public hearing be scheduled at the next meeting?
no, it's too close.
Too close?
It has to be the 8th of October.
Okay, so we got to put that off. Okay.
That needs to be part of our motion, or our next motion?
Right, so it sounds like we're going to split this into two motions.
3 now, or wait,
No, but just as long as we put it, expectations of when this is going to appear back on our agenda, right?
Right.
but
That's what we're
if we're going to send, don't we have to make a motion today to do an October 8th public hearing as well?
Yes.
Okay.
You can do that, yeah.
So you want to add
Does
that?
anybody want to tell me if they have a preference on where I group that? I'll group that in the zoning?
Please.
Sure, I'll make that motion second. Okay,
That's your second motion.
sure, okay.
Okay, so we have the first motion, and we have support on it.
Yes,
and
First
we're
motion is
good.
for the fact finder.
Right.
Right.
okay.
Right.
Now, before I call for a vote, is there anybody from the public wishing to opine on this and confuse us any further?
Sorry, but I'm sorry, but did you want me to discuss those as Nick briefed or not?
I don't think so, not at this point.
I didn't catch that, I'm sorry.
I didn't know if you still wanted me to give points on each of those cases or not.
It's up to the planning commission, I would recommend it if you're making a motion on something, but that's your purview.
You can do that after you take comments.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
Well, hello, I'm Brent Vasicek. I live on Charlevoix Street. I have a house, and the next door house is my Airbnb. I sent you all an email earlier, and hopefully you all had a chance to read that. First of all, thank you for switching the order. That was super kind, especially with the debate on the stage tonight. Hopefully I can make it home for that. Thank you for your careful consideration. You guys are doing a great job. Like, whatever you decide, like, I trust that you're doing your due diligence. You're coming up with some good points. So thank you for that. It's a land of opportunity, and it's great that I can do this, but I understand all your concerns because I am a neighbor in the neighborhood. At the last meeting, there was some talk about how do you get a hold of Airbnb. So I did a little research today. I have a number here. I will send it all to you. I'll give it out here too in case anybody at home wants it. 855-635-7754. 855-635-7754. I called that number today to make sure it worked. And I'm like, I'm not just getting a hold of you because I'm part of Airbnb, right? They're like, no, this is a public number. So use that if you need to, people at home. And yeah, that's all I have. I just wanted to say thank you for all your careful consideration. And if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them at any
Yeah,
time.
thank you, because as we discussed this morning, I went to that site, and it's very informative. They got a lot of information on the site. But they say the Airbnb says they have a 24/7 neighborhood support line. And I read through all of their thing, and I couldn't find any access to it. There's no number or anything else. They give you a website to go to.
Yeah, and then you have to click around, and then you're like, okay, what do I do? They really want you to send an email or something, but if you click
Yeah.
enough, it gets you that number. So I just wanted to put that out there now because that's like 8 clicks buried. And
But if you're an upset neighbor to an Airbnb, I think there should be a phone number that you can call,
yep,
aside from the police department.
and that would get you to somebody.
That would help out, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much
You're
for that.
welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else in public? Okay, seeing none, I'll then close public, and if we're done commenting, we'll pull a roll call on this, right? On your first.
so were we going to have
Or read the
Commissioner
details on
Bretnan,
each case
just a
number.
brief on each
Do you
case?
want that?
That's what they recommended.
I think we should. I
A
mean,
brief synopsis?
yeah, I mean, and I only have what I have in front of me, so
yeah,
there might be
but
further questions.
I'm just looking
but-
for 1 or 2 sentences.
Sure. And usually it's a quote. So, do you want, okay, so I'll go in order that I read them the first time. Thiel versus Goings. Deed restrictions allow landowners to preserve the neighborhood's character. That's the basis of that case. Bloomfield Estates Improvement Association versus Birmingham. Deed restrictions preserve not only monetary value, but also the aesthetic character considered to be essential constituents of a family environment. Let's see. Shadet versus Brill, SCHADT v. BRILL. The court concluded that building restriction cases involving covenants, term private dwelling house means a building designed as a single-family dwelling may be used by one family. Let's see. and in the one Tyran 467, Mish at 72, the intention to limit the use of property to maintain a residential neighborhood of a specific character if established by proper instruments are favored by definitive public policy. This one is Eager versus Peasley. The designated right to live in a district free from stores, garages, businesses, and apartment buildings is a valuable right. The nullification of such restrictions would create an injustice to those property owners because the right of privacy in a home is a valid right. It is the function of the courts to protect such rights through enforcement of covenants. We conclude that under the definition set forth therein, the act of renting a property to another for short-term use is a commercial use, even if the activity is residential in nature. Tyran versus Swit, holding daycare violated a covenant prohibiting home businesses. Donald Eager versus Celia Trust, restrictions for residential purposes, if clearly established by proper instruments, are favored by definite public policy. The courts have long and vigorously enforced them by specific mandate. This court has expressly recognized that the right of privacy for homes is a valuable right. That is all of them.
Thank you.
Yep.
So you still support?
Or-
Motion, support, any further discussion?
Yeah, if I may, were these, what did you read? The court order, you said a quote from what?
From the court order, yep.
The order?
The order or the written,
The opinion?
the opinion of the court.
Okay. So can you or anybody provide the complete case forward for the next meeting?
Well,
So
easily by
Perhaps our city
Googling
attorney
them.
could, you know.
I'm sorry?
Perhaps our city attorney could.
How? Why? Because she brought the cases, and the cases that she brought, she claims to be part of the fact-finding for what we're doing today.
Mm-hmm.
There might be 20 more cases out there. And first of all, and second of all, what do the deed restrictions have to do with anything we're doing today?
Because deed restrictions are like covenants by way of every time
What?
to a residential use, every time you sign a deed, it says that the deed is restricted to the city's zoning, and that is a deed restriction.
So, oh,
This is to
Great.
support lawsuits that could potentially come to planning because everybody was worried,
It
huh?
doesn't. Case law is case law. You don't need to cite it anywhere. That is law.
Case
And-
law is
and
case
case
law.
law in Supreme Court supersedes any and everything that we can do here.
Well, then it doesn't hurt to include it, does it?
Not necessarily, it's just unnecessary.
I think
And
that-
we need to read the whole case because it might be completely irrelevant. If not, it might harm us. We don't know. I
Well,
don't
we
know.
can ask the city's opinion on that,
The cities?
the city's,
The city
or the
council?
city attorney's opinion on that.
Sure, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But to include as a fact finding to forward to the city council, I don't think that's proper.
Well, I included quotes, and you can vote no.
Oh, you don't want to discuss either?
No, I can discuss it with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I know how I can vote yes or no. I'm
Well,
just
what do you
discussing.
want to discuss?
I'm trying to understand, why are we doing this
It's to
in
support-
this specific ordinance that we're trying to do?
To allow, just like many other ordinances, have you looked up short-term rental ordinances written by other cities?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, ones that put forth a restriction on residential. They usually include them, with them, a fact-finding as well as guidance in what led them to form that opinion.
But those cases did not lead us here where we are today.
They support where we are today.
Ah, okay. Support, sure. But lead us and brought us here? No.
Okay, so what language would be appropriate for supporting us today?
We have an issue in this town, right?
Correct.
That there are Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and they're not regulated. That's why we're here today.
Mm-hmm.
Those cases did not bring us here.
Well, they kind of did. They opened the door to allow us to properly zone out of residential areas.
Okay.
One of them was a daycare that was operating out of a residential area that said that they were allowed to have a home daycare operating as a home occupation. Some people claim that Airbnbs are home occupations when they operate as a commercial use.
Some people.
Right? So these are specific cases that city council can look to, or people that want to know more about our ordinance can look to and say, oh, maybe these cases are supporting this ordinance and where they're going with it.
Okay.
Could we maybe tack on the motion, just we request the city attorney to review the fact-finding documents for relevance?
We can request that, yeah, but
I mean, I don't want to make it dependent on the city.
No,
attorney.
just, just,
wouldn't think it'd have to be part of the motion. I think we can just request that administratively.
and if he doesn't respond, he doesn't respond.
Right.
Right.
To Nick, though, you've pulled this on me before. We've got a quorum here. We have 5 people here. Now, if I pull roll call on this and we vote, it has to be unanimous, correct? Or if one person backs out of it, that happened to me before, and
I think the 5 is when you're discussing site plan related items. Since this is for an ordinance, I believe it would
Rules
just be a
change.
majority.
okay, the majority would win on this then.
Yeah, so the rezoning, I think that's the one most recently that you're thinking of. The ordinance requires 5 members of the entire body, which is 9. For
Right.
something like this, it should just be the majority of who's here.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to sound like I'm against this by any means. I just want to make sure what these cases are, because there's a lot of language in cases that from the beginning to the end, it starts like Larry and ends out like Jerry. Okay? And I want to know what the cases are, and I don't want to vote on something just for the sake of voting, send it to council with our support in it without even reading the cases. You get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Because I want to read the case first, not just a quote from a case. It means nothing to me.
But is this going to be a draft that, because we don't have anyone here, that we're asking for it to be created, but then it's going to be, we're going to look at it again in October 8th or whatever it is? To give us our chance to research if we deem so?
Right.
Yeah.
I would hope so, because that would make much more sense to me if I could. I can cite you 10 more cases here. Do they mean anything to you?
Well, if
Probably
you want
not.
to, add to my motion, you can.
And what?
Your 10 more cases.
That would mean nothing to you.
Well, you can let me know what they say.
They will still mean nothing to you because I'll read just a quote from it. Because as I said, cases are very, especially the orders and the opinions of judges are very thorough. So I'm going to read about it. And-
Well, and these were all, I mean, I'm obviously not citing cases that were not found
I
to be in
believe you.
favor of,
Absolutely.
of what I was quoting.
I
So-
trust you, but I just want to read the case.
Sure, you have every right to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming back before us, right?
Yes.
So between now
We're not done here. We're just.
and the next time, I mean, it would be nice, I mean, this is going to be published, right? So all those cases that you identified are going to be listed.
Yeah.
We can,
and
on our
I can
own
give you the
initiative-
spelling, Nick, if you need it.
Between now and the next time, go out and read those cases. If we come back here and we say, you know what, that case, throw that thing out, don't use that as evidence for city council, we can do that next time we meet.
Yeah, so the fact-finding document won't go to city council until the ordinance goes there. So there's still time. What we can do is take the fact-finding motion that Ms. Redmond made, have that in front of you next Tuesday, or next meeting, which is 2 Tuesdays from now, for your review at that time.
Okay.
Sure.
With those cases.
So you want me to amend my motion?
For the fact-finding, I don't think that's appropriate. What would you be amending?
So I was including those, but you need me to,
Well, no, I think and again, I'm not voting, but it may be appropriate to include them, and then next meeting, the fact-finding will be presented. At that time, if there's any modifications to that fact-finding document, they can be made at that meeting.
Before we send it to
Right,
council or
because-
approve the
Oh,
ordinance.
okay.
right?
Because
Right.
essentially, like, the document will be drafted and ready, but it's not going to go to city council until the
Gotcha.
ordinance is done. So if it's presented in a way that maybe something was missed or needs more clarification on, we can
Mm-hmm.
add that before October 8th, but we can have the draft document to you on the 24th.
Okay,
Yeah, Joe will have it all typed out for us, nice and neat, in several pages.
With pictures.
Circles and arrows and paragraphs. Okay, so if we're all there, I think I'll take a roll call vote on it then.
And this is just a fact finding, just for point of order.
Right.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'll make a motion to set a public hearing for October 8th and amend our original zoning ordinance for STRs to include a 10 cap per year, as well as adding I-1 to the zoning.
Support.
Did I miss anything? No? Okay.
You're making the same motion again, or what's the?
Well, the first one was just the fact finding. We removed the beginning portion,
Okay,
and we included.
confusing.
Yeah, I know.
I just have a quick question. Are we in discussion now?
Yeah, supported.
Okay, great. So just a question about the definition of short-term rental. We have a definition that was originally proposed, and then we have another definition later on in the document as an example that Joe included. And it really has to do with short-term rentals that are residences. That is, I own my home, so I can rent out my home for a short-term rental a couple of times a year, and that's not considered, this ordinance or this zoning ordinance that we're talking about has nothing to do with me, right? The way it is now. I'm just,
Yeah.
it's later on, maybe we don't do anything now, you guys, but I'm concerned that those situations, they don't even get licensed, we don't even know they exist, and those could become problems later, and we're not even addressing them, right?
How would we address them if we don't know, aware of them?
Well,
Until they're a problem, we're not gonna know about it.
Well, no, but, so if of those six, we just brought it up tonight, Joe suggested that some of those six that are add-ons or whatever could be those cases. I advertise on Airbnb and, hey, I'm not going to rent it to you all year round, right? But I can tell you, yeah, you can come in, when I'm out of here in a couple of weeks, I'll be gone for a month. You can have it for 3 weeks then, right? I can do that, right? But I live there, but I rent out my house for a couple of weeks here or a couple of weeks there, right?
Oh, if you
mean,
move out, okay. If you're out of town, you mean?
Yeah, I'm going on vacation, I'm gonna be going down to the Caribbean for a
Makes
month,
sense.
Yeah, well, and I
The
do
only
think.
wish, right?
Exactly.
I do think that there does need to be a little bit of clearing up language, because some of our language, going back to like the rooming houses and the boarding in tourist homes, it speaks right to short-term rentals before there was an Airbnb. And in some of those rooming houses, even like saying I open up my bedroom for someone, which to me is not as big of an issue, right? You're there, you're responsible for the person that's in the room. Someone can answer the door. But that's technically not even allowed. So I do think that we have conflicting language within our definitions as well, that maybe in the future we can look to clarify.
Yeah, so if that's the case, and the fact-finding motion's already been approved, when it's presented next meeting, you can add to that document. If there's specific items related to what you're talking about, or anything else can be added to that before it goes to council.
But Nick, is that something that planning, or is that something that we would send to council? I mean, ultimately, we always send a recommendation to council, but like, I guess it would be defined in our zoning ordinance, right? So if I found something that was conflicting in our zoning ordinance, in our definitions, is that something that you would prefer that we bring to you, or?
I mean, I think next meeting would be a good time to add it into that motion if there's any concerns. I mean, it's a finding of fact, right? So if you found that there's something that's conflicting with the short-term rental ordinance and the zoning ordinance, that can be included as a bullet point in the fact-finding document that's forwarded on.
And Joe, that term, was that primary residency? Was that the term you used, 14?
Yeah, so the general ordinance defines, or requires you to get the license if you're not, if it's not your primary
Maybe
residence.
residence, okay.
And we've, so the general ordinance would have to be amended by
Okay.
council.
All right.
Well, so that conflicts with a single-family home, allowing it within a single-family home,
What I'm
right?
saying, I think that what we're doing here is fine. What I'm saying is we have a hole
Mm-hmm.
that we're not addressing with this ordinance, with this zoning ordinance right now. So I don't want to lose sight of it. I don't think we should complicate this by saying, having two definitions, or trying to complicate this and saying, well, if it is your primary residence, this is the rules. If it's not your primary residence, this is the rules. All I'm saying is, we have a gap that I just don't want to lose.
Okay.
Because we should put, maybe it's okay if I go to the Caribbean and I rent my place out for 2 weeks to two different people for a month, right? Maybe that's okay, I don't know. We haven't even really talked about that. I just was pointing out that we're not addressing that in any way right now in this ordinance. I'm done.
If that's a concern, I think it's something that the planning commission could vote on next week to include, and just make it a point of potential discussion for city council when it gets to them.
Okay.
Can we do the motion now?
We already did the
We now
motion.
have
Yeah.
a motion and
Just in
support. a new
discussion.
one.
Not mean now, meaning today,
Right.
after our motion. Can we do that? Can we address his concern?
I don't think
Today,
he
I
has the
don't.
proper language to define things.
I don't. I mean, the other definite, just to be clear, I mean, I read both of these just a moment ago again, too, because the first definition is short-term rental. The words short-term rental mean any dwelling or condominium or portions thereof in which the owner does not reside. That is available for use or used for accommodations or lodging of guests paying a fee or other compensation for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. That is what's currently being proposed. The example that Joe provided was, and if I'm maybe, this also says requires it to be a principal residence, right, Joe? So,
Yeah, so-
but I've seen other ones that specifically address residential rentals. That is, I'm a residential owner and I rent my place, and there's ordinances around that are less restrictive typically than the other.
Right, and that's, so the definition that's currently in the amendment,
Matches the one that's in the general ordinance. So
Okay.
we're being consistent there. And then the example that I provided at the end is like a different approach. So some communities require it to be a principal residence. And they don't, a lot of communities that require it to be a principal residence don't even allow it if it's not a principal residence. If it's your principal residence, you can do it, and if it's not, then you can't.
Right, and so a secondary ordinance, or maybe we expand on this or something, but is in R1 and R2, we're not addressing the case where it's my primary residence and I'm renting it
That's
out for a couple of,
correct.
we're not addressing that at all.
Because it's not addressed in the general ordinance.
We have no rules around that whatsoever right now, and this isn't going to provide any. So maybe that's a follow-up ordinance around that specific case, right? Where I'm a resident that wishes to rent my primary residence as a short-term rental periodically throughout the year. We address that. I don't think that you can say, I don't know, I don't want to get into what you can and can't do, but I'm just saying we need to talk about that. Whether, do we allow it, do we not, what are the rules around that? Because we're still going to have people in R1 and R2, this gets passed by city council, it goes in, we're going to have people in
sounds
R1
like
and R2 that are going to be
Sounds
doing
like a
exactly
loophole, I
that.
agree with you. Sounds like a big loophole. Because
Pardon me?
it sounds like a big loophole.
Right.
Because I can see people getting smart and saying, well, I own the home, I reside here, just 364 days of the year I don't.
Right.
So.
Yeah, well, you literally.
In R1 and R2.
From a tax perspective, you make it a primary residence, right? So
Sure.
you can call it your primary residence.
Sure.
People do it all the time.
Sure.
I'm not talking about legality right now, but I could say my primary residence is my Gladwin Cottage.
Right.
But I live here.
Right. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
No.
Yeah. So, should we,
So are you asking Joe to come with some language to help clarify that for
Well,
the next
yeah, I
meeting,
guess I'm
maybe?
asking the commission, how do we want to approach this, right? I don't like the idea of taking up a bunch of time to make this particular recommendation or zoning ordinance.
complicated.
Too complicated, so we don't get anything to council right away.
Mm-hmm.
But I do not want to lose sight of this loophole that we're talking about right now
Mm-hmm.
and come back and talk about that.
and I'm afraid we gave some great ideas to people out there too.
Well,
So Joe, do you think that there would be the potential for you to draft some type of language by next meeting to help address that, or potentially give us options on addressing that?
I mean, I think my recommendation is get this out the door to council and then address this other issue. Because it's its own issue, and it's not covered in the general ordinance at all. So if we were to address it in zoning, we would have to keep in mind that we're addressing it separately from a licensing regime unless council wants to change the general ordinance.
But we can make a
So-
motion to get it put on the agenda, right? So we're just distinctly working on that general ordinance language after we get this one done?
I just think that
So we don't lose
once
it?
we've done this one, let's not overlap the conversations. But after the 8th, sure, yeah, we can definitely talk about it.
so it's not going to get lost in some way.
Keep us accountable.
I will.
So we have a motion and second right now?
Yep.
Yes.
Because you wanted to set a date for public. right?
Yep, we set a date, added I-1 and 10 cap per year.
Okay, so can I have roll call on that, please?
And that was Ms. Redmond's motion. I believe, Mr. Nishat, you seconded that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes,
All right, thank you.
thank you. Okay, now we're going to back up to agenda item number 7, which is presentation of the master plan update.
All right, so I am still working on text to address one of the comments we had last time about integrating the sustainability plan more thoroughly into the document. So I didn't provide anything for that tonight, but I guess everybody's had a little more time to sit with it and look at it and come up with any comments or questions they might have. So I think really what I want to, I mean, obviously, we can get into details if we need to, but the main thing I want to know is, are people comfortable with the goals that have been developed here and the general direction? And if there's anything that needs to change there, that's like a major thing, so we got to talk about that. But if we're fine with that, then, it's just a matter of details at that point.
So, Joe, I did have some questions actually about that, because did we just, I thought when we discussed putting forth the goals, we found that a lot of the goals that we had in 17 were still relevant to this master plan, and that we would, continue to add to those goals and kind of keep those as the forefront and, make more relevant the things that have changed in the way that, we hear responses. Am I recalling that wrong, that we were supposed to use those as a framework?
No, it's correct, is that the goals from 2017 still apply. We developed new goals for the specific areas of study here. So the goals from 2017 are carried forward. We could even append them to the end of this plan, just as a reminder, so people don't have to go to the separate document. But the document is explicit that the goals from the 2017 are carried forward, and then we're developing new goals that are specific to our study areas,
But I
the
thought we
topics
would,
of study.
so my thought when we talked about it was that we would be working those in within the framework that was the goals of 17. Because it does feel a lot like when I'm reading the new master plan, we're losing a lot of the, keeping, the integrity and the characteristic of neighborhoods, and there were a lot of different focus areas that don't seem to be represented in this master plan, as well as, I know you
That was by
mentioned.
design, yeah. We picked specific topics that we were going to focus on and develop new goals for. So we didn't
What were
address
those driven
everything.
by?
That was driven by the discussion we had way back at the beginning of this process, where we identified what our scope was going to be.
But shouldn't a lot of our results in our feedback be driving our goals?
They drove everything that is listed in here as a goal. I mean, that's where these goals came from.
Well, it just doesn't seem to align exactly with a lot of the feedback, at least from where I was reading anyway. I know that you mentioned you were going to send us an updated survey results, but I did not receive one. Is there a way that you can send us an updated?
Well, we have 8 new results to add to the results. So, I mean, I have started working that in. I just didn't have a chance to finish it. But it doesn't really change the overall body of answers very much.
I'm sure that the 8 people that took it wouldn't love to hear that.
Well, yeah, I mean, they can be included in but it doesn't really change much overall in terms of the thrust of the answers that we got.
So this is just a discussion item this evening. We're not gonna, it's not ready to,
No,
Put our blessing.
the idea was, are we okay with the direction
yeah.
that this is sending us in on these specific topics that we focused on in this master plan update?
I say I'm not.
Okay, well, then I need specifics about what you're not comfortable with in terms of the goals that are set forth in this update.
Well, the last update, we had community input for, let's see, we talked to senior citizens, high school students. We had a lot more public engagement with this. This time we've had the Clausen Fest and sent out surveys, and I mean, the Clausen Fest, we had one day, Mr. Tinlin was there as well. I feel like it was great. I feel like we need more of that. There's things that I feel like we've discussed a lot that are not represented in here, such, even the results about where people want to see more density in terms of housing seems to not be aligned with what this master plan puts forth. In a master plan is a development visionary for the city, and we're talking about changing a parking ordinance that, I know you said it was just to study that, but the language reads as though we're supposed to be open for development and allowing any developer to come in here and say, oh, but your master plan says you're going to do a parking study here. I don't
Not
love
what it says
those
at
things.
all, but
I know how it's used, Joe. It might not be word for word, hey, developer, but that's how it's used, and especially specifically on PUDs. So I guess I thought we were going to stay more in line with the goals that were set forth and work these new goals into that framework. Obviously, the heaviness of the sustainability, you already know that. I felt like that was pretty much the meat of the whole master plan. And I know that you took that feedback last time, but if we're speaking to what's in front of us today, this hasn't been updated since the 8th of August, so I feel the same
I've been
way.
trying to give people chances to give me
Oh, for
feedback on what's
sure.
been given to
Yeah.
it. So changing it in midstream, I don't want to like give you a new version of the document until you've had a chance to give me feedback.
I really don't like the idea of putting in here the study in, because, you know, I've already said this 1,000 times. Those sites don't, they are very broad in their parking regulations. I feel like, yes, parking is worth considering and worth talking about and worth studying, but I just don't see how that is explicit in here and not going to be used as a tool in a PUD to a planning commission. And a little bit more about senior citizens, our vacant building ordinances that we need, completing city sidewalks that are empty. How are we going to continue to keep families here and keep our schools supported? Those I felt like were more of what I hear from people when I'm talking to them and who this community is. Yes, water is a big issue, but I think people still live here because of their neighbors and because of the families.
Those sound like problems and perhaps complaints you're having, but do you have any solutions to them?
Oh, well, I just kind of was,
Because, I mean, we can discuss this for years and years. And
I mean, we set forth a scope at the beginning of this project and we followed the scope. We studied the areas that were in the scope
Right.
that we set forth at the beginning of the project. So there may be things that are not covered here, but that's because they weren't in the scope. And like I said, the goals from 2017 do still apply.
but you said you're putting them in the
So-
appendix. It's not, the goals of.
They don't have to be in the body of the plan because they've already been adopted. They're already in
That's not-
force.
that
This is-
doesn't feel
This
very-
is additive. This adds to them. So you've still got the 2017 goals. These goals are in addition to those.
It doesn't feel that way when they're at the appendix, I have to say. If they were on page 1, that I might feel a little differently about them being still relevant. So I was just thrown off a little about the layout because I thought that those were going to correlate with.
And we can
like,
move them to the front of the document. It's
Okay, if we're gonna talk about potentially doing mixed uses in essentially half of Clausen and all up and down every thoroughfare in Clausen, I feel like that is different than what our poll results show and different than what the residents and stakeholders actually spoke about.
I think you're very much over exaggerating how much of Clausen we're talking about putting these into. I think it's really like 3 areas.
How many?
BRD2 is like a huge swath that we're not talking about any residential use there.
But it backs to residential use, and you're talking about going from Main Street all the way up to Elmwood, 14 Mile, all the way to, I forget what street it is, and pretty much to 7-Eleven. I mean, that's a major change. That's a lot of residents that are going to be in front of us.
That's what your 2017 master plan calls for. We're just giving it more shape.
You're giving it more shape without the draw of attention to a keeping with the characteristics of
But that's what
Clausen.
all the language all speaks to that, though.
The characteristics?
We're not saying we're just going to blanket put a bunch of stuff down here. There's language in there about the character of different portions of 14 Mile. There's language about how we're treating the transition to the residential to the north. Like, it's like, that's what a master plan is for. You don't get much more specific than that. We have to respect the neighborhood next door, But we're trying to set forth, as you said, a vision for what could happen here. Right now, the master plan that we have currently adopted calls for a mixed-use district along 14 Mile between Washington and the Westgate District.
And do we have definitions yet for your mixed?
Yes, it's in the draft plan.
Oh, I didn't see that in there.
I think it's from on page 117.
Yeah, so it's,
117.
if you go to the future land use map, all of the categories are defined, so it carries forward the descriptions of all the future land use categories from the last master plan, and then it introduces the new descriptions. I mean, it's hard to have a deep discussion if that's not been read yet, so.
It has been read, and that doesn't define to me how big and how dense these mixed uses are gonna be, so it doesn't, I see roughly matches the BRD1 district zone. So, but it doesn't define to me what does a mixed use look like in terms of density, size, and scale? What is that? Is it 55, 70 efficiency units? What are we talking? I mean,
When you get into the corridor descriptions, it talks specifically about those missing middle part,
okay.
types. So we're clearly calling for something other than a big apartment building with missing middle. Or with,
In mixed one and mixed two?
with efficiency units.
In mixed use 1 and mixed use 2?
Which one's 2 and which one's 1? Mixed use 1 is... Mixed use 1 is the BRD1 district on southern Maine. And then mixed use 2, that's the BRD2 district. That doesn't incorporate residential at all. Mixed use 3 is the one that goes down 14 Mile. And then the North Main one is that little cluster north of City Hall.
So which one is it that you're speaking to?
Well, all of those areas are study areas that are addressed in the, what was the title of the chapter? Corridor Studies chapter. And there's our specifics in there about each one of them.
Okay, there's study areas and then there's future land use. So which one are you referring to?
They work together. So the future land use sets out these categories. And then we get into discussions of the character of these corridors, which are they're identified as those mixed-use districts on the future land use map. And there are, deeper specifics about how we're handling them in those corridor study descriptions.
So when someone comes in front of us with a PUD and they say, oh, this aligns with your master plan, are they saying it aligns with our future study or our future land use map?
So they both matter. So the future land use map matters, and the information that's in these corridor studies also matters. So because it's all part of your master plan. So they've got to consider all of it, and so do we, when we're considering whether or not to approve something.
If I may, Ms. Redmond, I think we should do a workshop of some sort and talk to our planners in a more workshop environment and see what our goals are as a as a planning commission, if you will, and their goals as planners are, and maybe to see if we can align those together. Because we've had this conversation over and over in every meeting, and I don't feel like we're any close to achieve the final document.
Right. 'Cause, I mean, if you look at the West 14 Mile description, it says this plan establishes the following principles for guiding this area's future development on page 109. And the first thing is focus residential infill and redevelopment on family-oriented missing middle housing types. The second one is improve screening to neighboring residential throughout the corridor. The third is where full redevelopment occurs, bring buildings toward the street with parking and screening in the rear. On the north side between Bywood and Manitou, permit upper floor additions to create live workspaces. Manage access directly onto 14 Mile Road by providing for cross-access between sites and directing drives to side streets in the extent possible. And then seek opportunities for shared or public parking for sites without space or for parking between Marias and Kinross. And then on the north side between Bywood and Manitou, seek opportunities for greening and additional landscaping and screening. So there's principles set forward for that corridor in addition to the future land use category descriptions. And each one of those areas is a study area, and it has a similar description that sets out those principles. So, you know, if there's something I'm not capturing there, well, okay, let's add it. But, like, I feel like we've been trying to respond to the feedback that we received and, you know, make sure that we're not over-egging things or, you know, I mean, right now, the master plan says there's a blanket mixed-use designation for the West 14 Mile corridor, and we've tried to break that down a little bit and say, well, different parts of the West 14 Mile corridor are different, and so they should be treated differently. Right now, if you were doing a PUD, you'd have a blanket mixed use that doesn't really define much in the master plan that you could cite. And we're trying to get more specific with the note about the missing middle housing types, which is defined elsewhere in the plan. And that's what's going to get you your family-oriented housing types. So, I mean, I guess I'm just a little bit at a loss as to, I mean, maybe I need to tie it together a little bit better, but I feel like we've been very responsive here.
How responsive do you feel like we've been to, what do we have, 67% seniors in Clausen or something?
I don't believe we're 60%.
How many percent are above, well, let's see, let's go to our housing, I don't remember.
I mean, that's another big part of the missing middle conversation is that you're providing places for people to move to when they can't take care of their homes anymore.
But we also lack a CIP. I mean, I know that how the city admin feels about CIP, but everything I could read on the state of Michigan talked a lot about the infrastructure in the CIP. And I feel like, me personally, I would like to know more about the recreation, how we're addressing our senior.
Well, the city is currently developing a recreation plan.
Okay.
So that's being done through the Parks and Recreation Division. I believe the planner who is assisting them is Carlisle Wortman. So they have their own process for recreation planning. That includes recreation programming as well as facilities. Mm-hmm. And that is not part of this master plan for that reason.
So does every city have a different recreation?
Yes. Recreation plans are so in order to be grant eligible through the Department of Natural Resources, you need to have a 5-year Parks and Recreation plan. It needs to be valid, which means that it needs to include a set of documents and elements that are embodied in a checklist that the DNR provides. And in order to be grant eligible, you have to be within the 5-year window after you've adopted that recreation plan. And then if you want to remain grant eligible, you have to develop an updated park and rec plan. So that's how it's done in Michigan.
Why do you think that the state of Michigan correlates the master plan with having recreation plans, CIP information addressing the city more as a whole versus just a commercial, residential use? And why do you feel like ours is missing that wholeness of putting it all together and how we work.
Well, the statute allows you to do two things. It allows you to do a master plan, and it allows you to do a master plan update. This is an update. Updates are generally understood to be focused on something. I did one that was literally 2 pages out in Bruce Township where they wanted to change the boundaries of the water and sewer district. So we changed the boundaries, provided the rationale for it, and went through the whole master plan process to adopt a little 2-page update to their master plan. This, again, we chose some specific topic areas here, and we focused in on those. And then this becomes an update to your adopted 2017 master plan. And then as far as recreation planning, that's just how the state decided that they were going to operate, is that recreation plans are generally, they can be included in a comprehensive plan.
Right, I'm not saying I want to take that over, trust
But
me,
they're,
but I
they're,
feel
they're
like.
generally a separate plan that is focused entirely on recreation. and
Because a
park
lot of what I
facilities.
was reading, especially in the state of Michigan legislature, that, whatever, the bill that they put up, talked about us addressing the need for parks and the need for open space and green spaces, and I feel like this doesn't have anything about, well, okay,
but
not
again, it's-
anything.
This isn't the full master plan. This is an update that's
Right, so
specifically
people
focused on
mince
topic
them together. So we
areas.
take out the future land use of 2017, put this future land use map there. So we're only replacing parts of that plan, and that's why it's confusing, because it feels
Right.
like a whole new master plan.
It's additive. It's meant to be additive. And we can get more explicit about that in the introduction, and we can include the goals from the last master plan in the introduction as well. I think that might be helpful. But,
And identify what we're touching. Right.
well, it already does, yeah. So what does this update do? There's a little section on that. I mean, that's why we're focused on what we're focused on, basically. And, the rec plan, I encourage you to involve yourself in that process. I don't know exactly where they are in the process at the moment, but they kicked off June or May, something
Is
like
that is that the Parks and Rec Board?
That's the-
Yep.
yeah, exactly.
And we didn't have that fully staffed appointees in there for a while, too. I know now they're full. And
Right.
because they weren't even an active board, right? That's how we got all those
Oh,
appointees.
they weren't an active board?
When I was councilman, they hadn't met for a while, right, if I remember correctly? We had to
Yeah,
get
so
that
they're
filled.
required to have a quorum to meet, and there's is it charter-based how many people are on there, or is it ordinance-based?
I can't remember, but I know that the fact that we went back and just looked at the meeting notes 2 years
Right.
ago, and we just had not done a good job of filling up those boards with appointees.
Yeah, so they, either by ordinance or by charter, I can't remember which one it is in Clausen, they have to have a certain membership in order to have a quorum for their board.
Yep.
So if they don't have that, then they can't meet. And I guess they've got a quorum now. But Scott, the new director of Parks and Rec, started the process back in, it was May or June or something like that. So I don't know exactly where they are in the process, but I think they're trying to be done by the end of the year so that they can submit to the state in time to be grant eligible for the next grant cycle.
So would it be beneficial to have a workshop for the people that are concerned about, I understand this is a strategic plan, right? And the focus
Right.
points and all that, but do we need to have additional workshop for clarification?
I mean, I guess I leave that up to the planning commission. I've wanted to sit around a table. We had tried to set up a meeting in that format once, but then there was something going on in the other room and we couldn't do it, so we wound up having it here anyway. I mean, I like the sit around a table and discuss things format. I mean, we've got to develop draft here, and at this point, we got to decide if we want to add anything to it or take anything away or make changes to it.
Well, and I think do we do this around the same time every time we do a master? So the 2017 wasn't an update to the 2008 then?
No, it was a new master plan.
A new master plan? Because that one also had engagement, like I said, in many other places where I feel like we've really kind of dropped the ball there. But is that common with an update versus a full new master plan?
I mean, you do as much outreach as you can. We haven't gotten to the last public workshop yet, because we don't have an agreed upon draft yet. But I mean, we did a couple of different surveys, and, you know, we had a few in-person opportunities for people, and, you know, I mean, the engagement you get on those, I guess, is, you know, it is what it is, and we had a decent response to the survey, so.
Yeah, and then you and Mr. Tinlin were also at Clausen Fest. Last fall, I also attended. It was either Claus and Pause or Fall Fest with the master plan table, discussing with residents as well.
So why, was the planning commission part of that, or
Yeah,
was it admin? Okay.
I've asked everyone to come and no one
Oh,
could show
oh,
up.
okay.
So, yes, yeah, I remember those email exchanges. Yeah, that's why I was there for the entire time.
Oh,
I
geez.
held your table for 5 minutes while you went and got it.
Oh, how nice.
Yes, yes. Thank you again for that.
Your table.
Don't tell me I don't
It's yours
show
now.
up for these.
So, I mean, I guess after discussion, it may be appropriate to try and schedule a workshop. I think typically these have been done before a regular planning commission meeting, just because people typically have the Tuesdays, locked away on their schedule. So the next two meetings are October 8th and September 24th. I will tell you, we're looking at least 2 site plans for the 24th and at least 1 or 2 for the 8th. So that would probably make for a really long Tuesday if you wanted to have the workshop at, say, 6 p.m. before the meeting. That's an option, or if the commission wanted to try and identify a separate date outside of the regular meeting for the PC.
Separate date tends to focus the mind.
Yeah, and a separate, like Joe just said, a separate date may also just allow the focus to strictly be on the master plan, which is probably necessary at this point.
Like Saturday at 7 a.m. or something like that.
What?
You'll be the only one there.
Any preferences?
I'm flexible, so you just pick a time, date.
I'm not very flexible, I'll say that. And I'm not, I just, I have kids at home, so, head of household with kids at home. So, I mean, I could do like a Thursday, if that works for people, Thursday evenings, or are you guys trying to do a daytime or an evening, or?
Thursday evening works for me. I mean, I can be flexible as well.
I can do it.
Do we want to have 2 dates selected tonight? And I can pull the planning
Propose it.
commission separately, just that way there's no potential OMA issues. Get the date that has the most potential attendance and go from there.
Yeah, don't use the third Thursday, though, because I've got.
Yeah, just send
Third
out-
Thursday of
Just send out 2 dates to
September,
all
Joe?
of
Do you
us.
just want staff to handle getting that scheduled? It'll be probably in 2 to 3 weeks. We'll look at a Thursday.
Yeah.
The room's available, pull the PC, and then make a decision from there. Because
Right.
the chair has the ability to call for a meeting,
Right.
and so I'll just communicate that date with you that works with everyone's schedules, and you can officially call that date.
It'll work.
We can do a workshop at a special meeting?
It would just be, the chair can call it a regular meeting, so we can call a workshop as well.
But if he sends 2 dates out to everybody, we'll figure out what's the best date.
I can send that email tomorrow with a few dates in mind. And then
In
get
the
some
email too,
feedback.
can we give a challenge to the commissioners and do a little homework and have them bring specific concerns for the master plan? Because I've read quite a few times, 136 pages, just so we're prepared to talk. I'm just throwing it out there.
I'm not gonna give the planning commission homework, but if that's something
bring what you
everyone
want
wants
to
to
the
do,
party.
I think
All
that
right,
would be
so
appropriate.
I'll bring at least my summary. There's minor things I see here, and language and content and some
Yeah,
of
I
the
think
flow
maybe
of
if
the
everyone could
document.
come with 3 to 5 specific items, more if necessary, but that way there's some specific talking points that we have. I think that would be helpful.
I've been in unstructured workshops too, right? So they tend to
Yes.
wander a little bit. So if we can have 3 to 5 topic points we want to talk about. as a
And then
group.
I would ask as well if it's possible to have those sent to Joe and I before, that way he can do some preliminary research. That way we're not sitting there in silence for a period of time.
Right.
That may also help with the flow of the conversation.
Thank you, that was my point. We'll give you some
Yes.
advance So we have very similar maybe concerns, and we can focus on those.
I'll send an email tomorrow to everyone and get that going.
Do we need to make a motion for that or no? To have a,
I don't think so.
I don't believe so.
Do we have to have quorum for that?
Not for a workshop.
But he's calling a special meeting, or he's calling a meeting.
It's a workshop. I mean, the thing is, the date, if there's not a date of the 2 or 3 that I send out that has more than 4 or 5 people, we're not gonna have the meeting, because the point is to have a workshop with the entire planning commission to get everyone's feedback. So,
Okay.
And it's just going to be a meeting, a discussion. There's no.
yeah, no, there's no,
voting going
no
on.
action
Okay.
will be had at that meeting.
Non-action. Yeah. Okay, does that mean we're done with the presentation of the master plan update? I believe Joe says we're done. How about a planners report?
Nothing else.
No planners report. Staff report and training opportunities.
Alright, so as usual, I already kind of alluded to the main point of the staff report, which is to let you know we've got 2 site plans scheduled for next meeting, the 24th, and then we may have 2 site plans for the 8th. We'll certainly have on the agenda, I know everyone's going to be looking forward to this one, is going to be the conceptual review of the planned unit development application for the Shalom site. So that'll be on that agenda. And again, that's the conceptual presentation. That's when the planning commission determines if it falls within the guidelines for the PUD. On that note, for the last few meetings, we've had rough attendance, and I'm speaking to the 5 that are here. So in the email I send tomorrow, I'll just reiterate the importance of the next few meetings. That way, we don't have to reschedule a site plan review. Just try to make sure your calendars are clear for these Tuesdays. It's really important that we try and get everyone here to get feedback. It helps momentum and to keep things moving forward.
Oh, sorry, Nick, which date is the PUD? Is it the second one, the 8th?
October 8th. Yes,
Okay.
the first meeting in October.
Is there a way we can add an overview of a PUD on the other,
The 24th.
the 24th?
Just like a preliminary overview of how
Yeah,
the
'cause I
PUD ordinance
do-
works.
I have questions about, and I don't know if it's appropriate to even bring them up here or not, or if I should just wait or what, but I have specific questions about PUDs and their, hold on, their use standards. I see them called out in specific zones, but I don't see PUDs called out in like residential, but I do see it in other zones, so I have questions about those things. So I'm wondering if we can kind of do a PUD overrun.
I think we can probably make that happen.
Okay.
I'm speaking for Joe and Andy right now, so.
Is that okay, Joe?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And then if you have specific questions, if you could send them to Joe and I before, that'd be great as well.
Okay.
And then the other important item is the September 3rd City Council meeting. They approved the first reading of the balcony ordinance and the public hearing signage. So that'll be going for the second reading next Tuesday in front of City Council. Pending their approval, there's a 10-day public notice period before the ordinance goes into effect. At that point, those ordinances will be enforceable. I do not have any additional comments unless there are any questions.
I noticed there's work going on at what will be Culver's at what was National County. And it looked, from your update, it just said there's waiting on county approvals before work is able to commence. Does that mean they got the approvals they needed so they could?
So that was for the engineering side, which is the exterior. So they're moving forward on the interior work of the building through a building permit right now.
Yeah, I know they took down the sign and they did some work on the, I lost my train of thought, the roof, you know.
Yeah, they're doing just their demo right now as they're preparing. We actually got the email today from WRC, which is the Water Resource Commission of the county, that they approved their side of the permits. So the engineering plans should likely be approved, hopefully sometime this week. Pre-con scheduled for next week, and then they're really gonna hit the ground running. So they're in line with everything. I think I've spoken to their representative every single day. So they
I
want
just
to
saw
get
some work going on, so
yeah.
I'm like, huh?
No, so that was related to the exterior. So
Okay.
they've have all their building permits pulled for interior work and demo.
Do you know what their timeline is? I'm just curious.
Well, their timeline has always been yesterday. So as soon as we get the pre-con, their general contractor is ready to hit the ground running. I believe they want to be open by Thanksgiving, but of course in Michigan, it's always weather dependent.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I was just curious.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions as well. Amazing Floors, was that in a floor place before, or like, I was wondering, did they get a site plan approved, or?
That was a reoccupancy
They're
of
a
a permitted
reoccupant?
use, yeah.
So they're the same place that was there before?
It's
Or the same
It's
use?
a permitted use, so it is the same thing. Like they're able to reoccupy that space as a permitted use.
It's the same people that are reoccupying it?
No,
It's a different use, though, than it was before, so it
it's
should have.
permitted though.
Yeah, but it still comes in front of planning commission in a change of use.
Joe and I spoke on this
What
one.
place you talking about?
Amazing Floors on Rochester?
It used to be a musical repair shop or something. It's right there by my neck of the woods, because I've been watching them just do landscaping. It's right there across from the dry cleaners,
On the east side of Rochester,
Yep.
yeah.
past CVS,
Oh.
going north towards Troy. I thought it was Restoration Company or something like that.
I think it says Amazing Floors on their
Yeah, they
new
changed the
colorful
sign
sign.
and stuff.
That's the current occupant
Yep.
is Amazing Floors, yes.
Because from my understanding, that a change of use does trigger a site plan review, and I'm wondering why that wasn't brought to us. And then I also have a question on the historic preservation ordinance. Where can we find more on the historic preservation when we talked about like the chicken and stuff? Like, is that in our zoning ordinance, or is that in the?
So for signage, the historic, that's in the sign ordinance, which is 769, I believe.
I thought we made them symbols and took them out of the sign.
Yeah, because I thought there was
The
conflicting
big shoe and the
things.
chicken, we decided they're
Yeah.
not part of the sign thing, they were symbols.
Right, but even signs were symbols, right? Yeah.
They can be. Yeah.
Because there was that whole lawsuit with the signs, right? So, because I thought, in when people have a historical preservation request, do they submit to come in front of the planning commission, or is that approved through admin?
For signage,
For historical preservation, like if they're trying to preserve something, the chicken, if they're doing something there and they want to save their chicken, but it's non-conforming and it's,
That was part of the site plan approval in that case.
well, I know, I'm using that as an arbitrary, I'm not talking about that one.
you're just using that as an example.
Yes. Joe, do you know if the historical preservation outside of a site ordinance, if that's something that they have to put in a request for, if it's something they're looking to preserve?
I was just pointing out the ordinance, so
Oh.
it's under 36-5, letter H, landmark signs, is where that is discussed. So the planning commission does have the ability to review and approve landmark signs.
So how would someone go about that? They just want, is there a specific application that they do?
We'd probably just have them fill out the site plan application, but it wouldn't be necessarily to complete
Okay.
a site plan for that, depending on the scope of what that application consists of.
And if somebody came in front of you for a site plan and made known that they wanted a landmark sign or preserve something historical, I mean, that should have been done with a site plan review already, right?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, can we get answers on the Amazing Floors place? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, we can have that answer for you next meeting.
Thank you.
I've been noticing emails on the city page about web security. Am I supposed to be doing something? Am I supposed to be taking a class on how to secure my website, or?
So the emails that you're getting is from our IT company, and they use WebRoot Security Awareness to do IT training. So technically, any user of a City of Clawson email should be getting those and doing them. Since we transitioned to a new IT company this year, we're still kind of getting that patched out on how those are communicated with. So we'd have a staff member had a question about that this week, so I put a question into our IT company, so I can get you more information on that. I just don't have a clear, concrete answer.
No
But yes,
classes.
it's an official, it's not phishing, it's a legitimately training from our IT
It's not
consultant.
necessarily the same I have to sign up for to fill out forms or anything.
No.
Okay, so.
Are we
are
supposed to
secure.
take it, though? Are you at?
That's what I'm trying to figure out right now.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Nick.
I'm sorry, can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
So I know, you hadn't mentioned anything, and maybe this isn't the right time, but it seems like I feel like we're still having code enforcement issues. Like, I don't know, we just heard a lady tonight talking a little bit about, hey, when no one's there, what do I do, and that type of stuff. And then there's been things that have happened. I mean, I know that we had Red Ruth, I think that's where it was, right? That place had at least three, maybe more than that, violations, and last I heard, they're still operational.
Yeah, so we were running a little bit handicapped with our code enforcement officers. One of them was out of the office for an extended period of time. And so now we were back to full strength, and now the other one has something going on where they're not going to be in the office. So we have a couple different staff members trying to piece in that gap. But code enforcement's difficult because when we get a complaint, that's where their time and energy goes, is to address the complaints that come in from residents. And then throughout that, they're inspecting the city. But it's something that we're working on expanding. It's just not moving as quickly as we would have liked.
So you have somebody backing up when
Yes.
people are out?
Yes.
But they're restricted by budget, right? They're both two part-time positions reporting
Yes.
into the police department? Yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
I was just curious, because, as we start, we're putting in this, we're talking about a short-term rental ordinance, and we're talking about, frankly, with that, I mean, we can pass all the ordinances we want, but if they're not enforced, it doesn't really matter, right? So, I mean, we just need to make sure that we're enforcing the ordinances that we already have on the books, right?
Correct.
And with that, I mean, to me, it seems like there needs to be some teeth in some of these ordinances. And I know that we're talking about zoning here. I would like, to recommend to council to have some pretty teethy ordinances for violators, and then hold them accountable.
Nick, is the city council ever, is that on their radar screen to maybe expand that staff? I mean, it's been traditionally part-time for a few years, right, to say the least?
For as long as I can remember. It's something we've talked about internally as staff, but haven't gotten to that next level of discussing it any bit further. I mean, that's the great thing about Clawson is that, we don't necessarily have a major crime problem. There's certainly code enforcement blight issues that we need to address a little bit more hard-handed, and we're aware of that. And as Mr. Tinlin was asking, is yes, we're trying to figure out how we can improve the way we are enforcing the code of ordinances, and whether that's with more staff, modified of the department, is remain to be seen, but it's something we're working on. So, doesn't really answer your question,
No,
but yes, we're aware of it.
I felt compelled to bring it up because it just seems to be a focus, and it's on my mind because we're passing an ordinance around short-term rentals, and we still have short-term rentals that are operating illegally, as far as I'm concerned, apparently. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean,
Right.
again, we're not 100% certain, but yes. And
So
again,
for the hundreds of people watching right now, I'd encourage them to send a note to their city councilman, because they have authority over headcount, right, on an annual basis as a city.
Via the
looks-
budget,
Yeah,
yes.
the budget, yeah. So that they felt there was a need, they can increase the code enforcement hours. So I think I'm going to send them a note, because I agree, down to one part-time code enforcement officer, that's pretty tough.
Clausen Kitchen went from 2 signs to 3 signs now in the right of way.
Do you take volunteers for code enforcement? I bet you I'd be pretty good at it.
Oh, really? Really?
Don't answer.
I
there's probably some legal aspects
I
of
think
that
that's a
we can do.
conflict of interest.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions?
No.
I'm good, it was good. Okay, we have no legal update tonight because we don't have a lawyer. Is there any comments before we adjourn? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Support. Motion support, roll call, please.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.